In our special telecast of the Great India Show Part 2, the Chola footprint is what we explore, one of South India's most illustrious dynasties. The Cholas, their legacy of power, culture and architecture has left an indelible mark on the subcontinent. The Chola dynasty, initially a regional power, was founded by Vijayalaya Chola, but it was his descendants who would truly shape the dynasty's future. Well, Vijayalaya Chola established the Chola dynasty in the region of Tanjavur. His descendants, particularly Rajaraja Chola I and his son Rajendra Chola I, transformed the Chola kingdom into a formidable empire. Rajaraja Chola I ascended the throne in 985 AD and embarked on a campaign of expansion. His reign marked the beginning of the Chola Empire's golden age, is what we call it. Rajaraja Chola is credited with consolidating the rule over South India and extending the empire's influence beyond the subcontinent. His military conquests laid the groundwork for a vast and prosperous empire. We have with us today Kamini Dandapani, writer of the book Rajaraja Chola, King of Kings, to help us understand the significance and the contribution of what Rajaraja did. Kamini Dandapani, I appreciate you joining us. I hope you can hear me. Kamini is perhaps not here with us. In fact, we're going to move on now. We're going to come back to Kamini in just a little while. Well, the reign of Rajendra Chola I, son of Rajaraja Chola I, marked the zenith of the Chola dynasty. His military campaigns took the Chola Empire to unprecedented heights, and Rajendra Chola I expanded the empire's reach into present-day Sri Lanka, parts of Southeast Asia, and even launched naval expeditions to the islands of Indonesia. His ambition was unmatched, and his administrative acumen solidified the Chola dominance. The Cholas weren't just conquerors, they were also patrons of culture and architecture and art. Their contribution to South Indian art and architecture are legendary. The great living Chola temples in Tamil Nadu are a UNESCO World Heritage Site that showcase the Chola dynasty's achievements in architecture, sculpture, painting and bronze casting. It includes Brihadaswara Temple at Tanjavur, the Brihadaswara Temple at Gangaikonda, Choleswaram, and the Eravetswara Temple at Darasaram. We have with us Anirudh Kanasetti, an Indian writer, historian, and winner of the Sahitya Akademi Yuva Puraskar, to delve into the golden age of the Chola dynasty. Anirudh, appreciate you taking out the time and speaking with us. Well, we've all studied history. We've all, fleetingly, if I can say now, studied about the Chola dynasty. But do you think enough is done when it comes to celebrating the contribution of this great dynasty and how still the resonance and the echo of the great work they did prevails?
Just 1 second.
Hi, Devanit. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And that's an interesting question. As you said, I think that to a lot of us, the Cholas are a footnote that we come across perhaps in our history textbooks, perhaps we read an article or two about them online. But frankly, I think that the Cholas were one of the most remarkable and really one of the most global of all of medieval India's superpowers. I think that in particular, their wide, expansive trade networks that extended not just towards the east, but also deep towards the west. There's an increasing body of evidence showing, for example, that for their remarkable bronzes, which perhaps are the most famous of all Chola art objects, some of the metals, which included tin and copper, were coming from potentially as far away as Spain and Sicily. It's a new archaeometallurgical discovery. And in addition to that, it's really under Chola power that you begin to see a wide expansion of Tamil, the first emergence of Tamil, I believe, as an international language that is spoken not just in India, but also in Sri Lanka. And there's a lot of evidence that it was potentially spoken as far away as Java, where Tamil merchants worked as tax collectors. We know that the Cholas engaged in wide-ranging diplomacy, really reminiscent of contemporary India's look east policy. In fact, we know that the Cholas exchanged embassies with Burma. We know they exchanged embassies with the kings of present-day Cambodia. So just in terms of their sheer global span, but also in terms of their deep and lasting effects on Indian society, some of the most iconic of South Indian temples, which today attract millions of pilgrims, and I would say are perhaps among the most devout places on earth, places that have been considered holy for centuries upon centuries, really were established under Chola power. It's really under Chola power that they received their first infusions of patronage. It's then that South Indian temples began to emerge into the great towns that they are today. Many of the most iconic examples of South Indian architecture, including the famous Gopurams, really arose in the Chola period. So I really think that a deeper understanding of Chola history really deepens the understanding not just of South India's history, but really of the world's history, and helps us better understand the way that India interacted with the rest of the Indian Ocean world. Once you take the longer perspective on them.
Right, and Anirudh, do you think that there's this ongoing debate about what Indian history we grew up talking about and grew up listening to, vis-a-vis this mass volumes of history that have been obscure, or rather deliberately made obscure from us because of whatever political motivations and other reasons. Do you think that the Chola dynasty was also a sufferer in this kind of a predicament?
Well, I think the answer is multidimensional. I do understand why the earliest generation of textbook setters, in the aftermath of partition in a country that is so vast, so diverse, and still healing from the wounds that were inflicted by the British during the freedom struggle, I understand why there's a tendency to think of India's history as primarily focused in North India and the Gangetic Plains. But I think that in the 21st century, we are more than mature enough and really more than curious enough as a society to really need to understand how all of India's regions, not just South India, mind you, but even the history of, for example, Odisha, the history of Northeast India, very rarely feature in our understanding of how India came to be India. And I completely agree that regional histories need to play more of a role in our understanding of the past. And I think especially that as a South Indian myself, I really believe that South India's history needs to have much more attention. And I think it's important to understand history not just in terms of dynasties and which king came after which king, but really to understand more deeply how is it that history, how is that the different kingdoms, the different regions shaped how India came to be India today.
For the uninitiated, how would you describe the Chola Empire in terms of the contribution that they have provided to our country, and of course, the kind of modern outlook they had even at that time?
I think that the Cholas really are one of the most remarkable dynasties, not just in Indian history, but really in global history. If you were to look at the early 9th century, which of course Kamini has written about in so much detail in a wonderful book, you'll see the Cholas were not just kings who ruled over subjects. They actually worked with a large number of village assemblies, a very diverse kind of society where many people, not just kings, we're also talking about merchants, for example, were powerful. And the Cholas had this extremely innovative way of using temples and temple economies to integrate diverse sections of society and use that to mobilize astonishing amounts of resources. You were mentioning earlier, for example, Vineet, the great Chola temples, the Vidishwara temples, the Airavateshwara temples. Each of these Chola temples required the mobilizations of hundreds of thousands, lakhs of tons of stone. And the Chola state usually built these temples within 10, 15 years. So can you imagine the kind of organizational skills that you would require to be mobilizing thousands of tons of stone, collecting thousands of tons of rice in revenue, and also sending out armies of thousands of people, equipping them with high quality carbon steel swords, to be equipping them with food and resources, and also directing them strategically into different regions. They're really, I think, a truly extraordinary medieval power. And the more that I understand them, the more I read their inscriptions, the more I begin to understand these people as personalities. I really think that they're some of the most extraordinary Indians of the last 1,000 years.
Okay. All right. Kamini Dandapani, writer of the book Rajaraja Chola, King of Kings, is also here to tell us more about this great dynasty. Kamini, thank you for speaking with us. I hope you can hear me. I would request the rest of the guests to please mute themselves. Kamini, what was your motivation for writing this book? Kamini, are you there with us? All right, there seems to be a problem. Kamini, let me come back to you.
All right. Thank you. I'm sorry about this. So
Kamini, if you can just please settle down and put your phone or your camera at a place where we can see you properly. I can see more of your hand than your face, please. So if you'll come back to you in a second.
Okay, can you see me now?
I can see you now, but can you hear me, please?
Yeah, I can hear you just about.
Kamini, you're on national TV. I hope you understand that. Nevertheless, I'll come back to you in just a minute. Well, early naval operations included the conquest of the Maldives and parts of Sri Lanka. These campaigns helped establish Chola dominance over the Indian Ocean and the routes, and secured maritime trade interest as well. The most notable of the Chola naval expeditions were directed towards Southeast Asia, and the Chola Empire conducted extensive campaigns in the region, targeting the kingdoms of Sri Vijaya and other maritime states around 1025 CE. Rajendra Chola I launched a major naval expedition against the Sri Vijaya Empire, which controlled much of the modern-day Indonesia and Malaysia. The Chola fleet, consisting of a large number of warships, navigated the complex sea routes to reach the Sri Vijaya capital of Palembang. The successful campaigns helped the Cholas to establish a temporary maritime hegemony in Southeast Asia. We have with us Vedveer Arya, historian, to help us understand how India was a pioneer in naval fleet during the Chola dynasty and how it helped when it came to expanding its empire. Vedveer Arya, appreciate you joining us. Well, once again, it's time for you to illuminate us that, centuries ago, there were dynasties, there were empires hailing out of India, which understood naval routes, they understood the capacity of the sea, and they understood that, dominance not only within India, but outside of India on foreign lands was a true way, the true essence of, consolidating power.
Yes, especially the southern peninsula, this was the hub for the sea trade since ancient times. During the time of Cholas and if you say Chalukyas, Cholas, then Vijayanagara, the South India contributed a lot to the wealth of India. Actually, after Guptas, North India was mostly disturbed. It is the South India that contributed the wealth to nation. This was the reason why in 17th or 18th century, when actually the economists have estimated that India used to contribute 23 to 25% of the world GDP, that actually came from South India. It's not just Mughals contributed, it is generally the kind of a wrong narrative is being told to
Wasn't it
us.
also Bengal and its textiles, sir, that was
It's mostly the South India. The sea trade used to contribute because Indians discovered the navigation. It is actually Pliny also writes in his book that somewhere in the December, when the monsoon used to return, this was the right time to travel towards the west, to the Red Sea, Egypt, and the Arabs, probably somewhere in the Africa also. So this was the westwards the sea trade used to go. Then they used to return when southwest monsoons used to return somewhere in the May, June, July. These were the months. This within 6-7 months was very ideal to go towards Wordsworth and come back. And the same sea winds they used to use when the southwest monsoon somewhere June, July, they used to travel towards the Southeast Asia and the China. Then they used to come back somewhere in the November, December. This is how the Indians mastered the sea trade, and especially the using this navigation and skills using the natural wind patterns. So this contributed a lot to the nation. Apart from that, Indians actually nurtured, especially Chola Dynasty. The Indians had a lot of skills in metallurgy, in well-known in textiles, and a lot of other commodities like pepper and a lot of spices and other. So this has contributed a lot, and sometimes Romans used to pay to Indian textiles almost the weight equal to gold. So this was the reason why India flourished a lot. Since during the sea trade, the Arabs became middlemen to the West. That's why the Europeans started discovering India. They wanted to have a direct trade instead of through middlemen. So this is how Vasco da Gama landed somewhere in the May 1498, following an Indian trader. The biggest ship, what he has seen actually, the Indian ship was 3 times bigger than what the ship the Vasco da Gama was traveling. So Indians built massive ships. Even Fahian mentions about it. So this was the South Indian, especially Cholas. They have actually laid a strong foundation for the sea trade, and finally Vijayanagara encashed over it. This is how Indian wealth was created by this great dynasty called Cholas.
Right, and Vedveer Arya, India when it was found and discovered by the British, had a considerable GDP. We were replete with natural resources. We had a good repository of precious metals and gems as well. Considering that the Chola Empire was, progressive to say the least, what kind of contribution did they have in making India, one of the richest nations in the world at that time?
Especially the what I already told us about the trade. Apart from that, there's special stones and other things. These were not mainly. We have a lot of resources from the western side also, like Afghanistan, Pakistan. In very ancient times, we had great resources from that side. In the South India also, mostly we contributed to the commodities as well as the skill-based products. Mostly the metallurgy, because the wood seal, that was actually the South Indian great contribution. That steel. Actually, we were the I think only one biggest exporter of steel during that time. And the textiles is well known, and apart from the spice trade is well known. So we used to get a lot of because the diamonds, whatever we got, it is actually we have brought from the African side to, and especially the Sri Vijaya Empire. They had a better mines of gold, because that was known as Suvarna Bhumi. So India got gold from outside, even the diamonds and others. But we used to give much better products than world ever had. So the best, the craftsmen, the products having the better skills. It is actually the South India had that tradition, because father-son tradition, the India traditionally followed. Father used to transfer his skill to son. This is how we manage the skill management. And this was nurtured by the South Indian kings, and Cholas did that one to ensure that the skills are managed better, because you have to be best in the world whenever you are trading. So maintaining that better skills, the Cholas actually dominated over the sea trade, actually world trade, and we contributed more than, I don't know what at that time during the Chola period, most probably we have contributed maybe 35% to 40% of the world GDP. That later reduced to somewhere 25, 20.
I don't think there are any sources for this. I don't think that we
Okay,
have
all right. Let's also bring in Kamini into this conversation. Kamini Dandapani, your book, the book of Raja Raja Chola, the King of the Kings. What was your motivation behind writing this book?
Well, I had several motivations. Growing up, my history books barely covered South Indian history. It was mostly the history of the North and independence. So I developed a interest in history much later in life. And I started digging around on my own, actually. I started a blog in which I wrote a lot of history pieces. And then it was my publisher who approached me and asked me to work on this particular book, about Chola history. And I told them I'm not a historian, I'm not an academic, this is not my area of expertise. And they said, this is precisely why we're asking you, because we want a layperson's account, something that, people like all of us can enjoy reading, because what was there till then was very, very dry, boring. It would put you to sleep in seconds, So multiple motivations. It was very, very hard, but I'm so glad I did it.
So what was that, one uniqueness about this king, about Raja Raja Chola, and of course the dynasty that he created, that you think that the entire country should know? Of course, like I said in my opening monologue as well, that most of the knowledge that people have about the Chola kingdom is cursory in nature, it is peripheral in nature, but it definitely can need it needs some marketing, which perhaps you can provide.
Absolutely, you said it. So, I mean, there are many reasons. The fact that we're talking about the Cholas all these, 1,000 years later means something. So there were several reasons why Rajaraja, I think, stood out and why he's called the greatest of the Cholas. First of all, he and his dynasty came up at a time of tremendous chaos, instability. South India was in a state of great flux at that time. And, most of what we call kingdoms or empires were small regional little powers. They had captured a few villages or towns beyond their core territory, but that was that. It was constant backstabbing, fighting, just grabbing territory. And in the midst of this highly, highly unstable period, Rajaraja managed to create what I guess today we would call a kingdom. I mean, there are people who squabble with, how we define it. But the fact is that almost all of peninsular South India came under his, rule, part of Sri Lanka as well. So he really thought out of the box. He was not content with, just having a few stray villages beyond his immediate core territory. He methodically went out and captured a large territory. And now having got that, he had a real, massive problems at hand because these were all diverse. They worshipped differently. They spoke different languages. They were fiercely loyal to their local, powers. So to kind of ensure loyalty was a difficult thing. And he did this in several ways. I think the most amazing thing was the temple he built, the Brihadishwara temple. It was mammoth. And, this was a man who thought big out of the box. And I don't know where he got this kind of thinking from. But the temples until that point were small little, 2 and 3 story structures, very local to the villages that they were in. People worshipped right there. They had a rich history of association with, the Bhakti saints who had been there a century or two earlier. But the Brihadishwara temple was the tallest structure in, I would say, all of India at the time. There was nothing of that magnitude that had been built. And it was in a place with no prior religious association. And he drew the entire kingdom into the working of this temple. And that was one way he kind of consolidated the kingdom and made them feel that they had something in common. So it was a matter of prestige if you donated to the temple. Revenues from villages all over his kingdom were poured into the temple for its building and its upkeep. And the other thing, I mean, Anirudh and Mr. Arya have already spoken about it, about the trade. He was connected, hooked into a much larger world. He did not think local. So he saw there was a world beyond. He somehow found out that, securing a trade deal with China would be to his benefit. So he sent a trade delegation there. That was far-sighted thinking, So he drew that world into his own. He was very, very connected. So we have a lot to, learn from Rajaraja about the way he operated. He kind of had a big land organization survey that he did to standardize measurements and standardize so much because, as I said, this was a ragtag collection of villages that did things very differently. So he tried to standardize things. So for this and so many other things, art flourished in his kingdom. I think he should be really admired. And that's why we're still talking about him today.
Well, in context to our history, do you think that, the narrative is lopsided and a lot of leaders, a lot of, people like Rajaraja, are not given the credence and the exposure and the volume that they deserve, and that needs to change?
Absolutely. As I said, when I was in school, we barely learnt about this. All of South Indian history was crammed into one chapter with, a paragraph on the Cholas, one on the Pandyas, one on the Pallavas, and it's a real shame. And we should not think of these histories as regional histories, So this is Indian history. We are all Indian, and this is part of our history. And I feel very, very strongly about this, that people need to learn and be proud of what... Not just the Cholas. Anirudh has written amazingly about the Chalukyas and the Rashtrakutas. There's so many fascinating histories that are part of the entire patchwork, the quilt of Indian history.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.